welcome to our Citizenship and Reorganization class today, 1924 and then 34, and then the report from 38 by John Collier. It'll be a fantastic class. I'm really excited for the lessons we're going to reason today. Brenda, would you be willing to start us with a prayer today?
Okay.
Thank you so much. Here's a microphone for you.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we are thankful for this beautiful day and for the opportunity we have to come here and learn about American history. And we are thankful for our homes and for our families and for the missionaries preaching the gospel. We ask you to please help us learn much today that we'll be able to take these lessons into our hearts. And please bless our families, and we love you very much. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Brenda. Thank you. Well, friends, we're going to start today with a little activity that I'm excited about. We'll need to start by calling out ones and twos for each of you. So would it be one, Leah, and a two for Isaac, a one, and a two, a one, and a two, then a one. And I can work with the twos, but I'm sure we'll probably have others joining us soon. The ones, we're going to look for the positive aspects of the Indian New Deal. The twos, you will look for the negative aspects of the Indian New Deal. We're going to try to reason together the things that are positive, the things that are negative. And the reason why I want to do this is I have actually been surprised as I have looked at the essays already, some of them, and noticed that there has been quite a spread of opinion about the Indian New Deal. And the IRA, which was part of that Indian New Deal that FDR worked on during the Great Depression. I've seen that there have been some who pointed out, I really think this helps them to become self-governing, and self-governing is what we're aiming for. And then others who said you can't have self-government forced upon people. And it's actually been quite kind of interesting to look at this really fascinating period, because first of all, what we'll see, let's see here. Ready to connect. It appears that it might not be working for a moment, but that's okay. I'm sure it will come back soon. What we'll see is that 1924 was a big year because, as you read, this was the year that citizenship was offered to all Native tribes. And of course, there were many who had an issue with that. Do you remember what the issue was? What would you reason from what you read? There were some who said, this is preposterous. The United States government cannot offer citizenship in this way. You don't just pass a law and make all the tribes citizens. Please. Yes, we've got a couple of these here. Spread these out a little bit.
I remember one of the things they said is you might as well make the Mexicans become American.
Yeah. Yes, right. This is interesting. Congress may as well pass a law making Mexicans citizens. That somehow now, that for a law for those living in Mexico right now, that, well, we've just decided that everyone in France is now a United States citizen. We've decided that everyone in South Africa is now a United States citizen. They had an issue with that, saying, wait a minute, we are our own nations. We should have a say in whether or not we want to be citizens of the United States. This isn't just what gives you the right. And so, anyway, what we'll see though is that this draws, a lot of debate. Of course, though, as you may have noted, by this time this was sort of only affecting really a third, of the tribes of the Native Americans. 2/3 had already, in one way or another, become citizens, had the opportunity to choose to do that. And so that's why I think rather than focusing on, sort of these questions of citizenship, what will have a bigger impact on Native Americans will actually be this question of lumping them into the New Deal. And what do we do about these Native tribes? And thus we have this really interesting IRA, Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. And then, of course, we have a report on sort of the effects of the program 4 years later by John Collier. What I'd like to do is to have you, and let's see, we've got some books here, so we can do it this way while we're working on a couple things. And so, I'll pass this over to you, and Once you here, you have a book, and you, okay, I think we all have books then. Wonderful. What I'll ask you to do is, if you are a 1, once again, you're looking for positive aspects of the Indian New Deal and the IRA as this very weighty manifestation of the Indian New Deal. If you are a 2, right, you'll be looking for negative aspects, right, and trying to reason, what do we think of this? Because, like I said, I was very surprised, actually, at just how divided the essays were, which I think will make for, hopefully, some wonderful class discussion today as we reason and relate together. What we'll see is I'm going to start with the quote in just a moment. I'll read it to you until I can put it up there. This is the one from President Benson, and I think this is an interesting framing idea to keep in mind as we try to reason positives and negatives. Here's what President Benson said. This is in the November Ensign of 1985. He said, "The Lord works from the inside out. The world works from the outside in. The world would take people out of the slums. Christ takes the slums out of the people. And then they take themselves out of the slums. The world would mold men by changing their environment. Christ changes men," thank you so much, Mr. Anderson, "who then change their environment. The world would shape human behavior, but Christ can change human nature." Before we jump in, why don't we reason some principles from this wonderful quote that you'll see will come up again and again and again, the principles will, in our discussion today of the pros and cons of the IRA, this Indian Reorganization Act. What would you reason from this quote as a framing set of principles for today's discussion? Please, Gordon.
So I heard this parable. So there's this gatekeeper. He's sitting on a stump in front of a village, and so this one man comes along and he wants to know what the village is like, and the gatekeeper asks him what his old village was like, and he said it was a really nice place. Everybody served each other. It's like, well, this city is just like that. And then another guy comes along and he wants to move in, and he asks what the city is like, and the gatekeeper says, "What was your city like?" And he said, "Oh, everybody was mean to each other and stuff like that." And he's like, "Yeah, this city is just like that." And it's just a parable of your perspective, like the world, they change your surroundings, but Christ can change the people who then change the surroundings.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Gordon. Anyone else? Principles you'd reason from this great quote, very famous quote. Please, Caleb, we've got a microphone for you. Oh, we've got one. Sorry about that. Go ahead, please.
So I think similar to what Gordon said, people, and this is the worldly perspective, is they often look for money or power or something else, or the government gives money or standing or whatever, and they're always looking for something like that to give them the happiness that they're looking for, and they never are able to find it, because that happiness doesn't come from any of those things. It comes from Christ.
Sure.
So if you really, truly want to change someone or bless their life, don't give them money, don't give them power, give them the gift of the gospel.
Yes, thank you. So well said, thank you. Anyone else? Please, Isaac.
Sometimes I try and overwhelm myself with doing too many things at once.
Yes.
And I found myself not being able to accomplish anything at all because I'm just burdened by everything around. And also our government, they think that, or one way that they've tried to change the nation is lately is by changing the whole government as a one and then focusing like really broad. When this nation was founded, it was founded with the individual at the beginning, and then families, and then communities, and builds up like that. And so, like Christ works with the individual, who then works with family, and then continues to build like that. And so it's kind of like that line upon line principle, and where we just kind of jumped in and tried to, I gave the natives this welcoming into our whole new society, and I feel like it was kind of too much for them to really consume. It just got them lost. Some of them were able to deal with it, but that's my reasoning.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Please, Mr. Anderson.
I like the line that says the world would mold men by changing their environment. And we see so often a focus of that. Let's change everyone's circumstances, their surroundings, whether that's, as we see here, by creating some kind of environment, or whether legally or physically a land for people, but Christ first changes men. He worries more about that, changing their hearts first. And I think that when we want to truly change the world in a Christ-like way, then we'll focus on helping men and women and children first before we'll focus on environment, right? Because those people can then change the environment. That's one of the guiding principles I see in this quote. Focus first on men and on their hearts and minds, then maybe on environments, but the most effective and efficient way, the way Christ does this, is he touches hearts and minds, often through words and through examples.
Thank you. I love that comment, just this classic comment about internal versus external. Internal will then not only see a change internally, but it'll make an external change by those who've been changed internally. Love that. Well, friends, this is really interesting, because where the government sort of heard the Indians in 1924, they figured, if you're saying you're unhappy because now we're offering citizenship, but you don't really want it, at least some do, some don't, this big question of self-determination came up. And these words would be used again and again and again and again and again. We simply want to choose for ourselves how to live our lives as Native Americans. And so, with that in mind, 10 years later, FDR and others brings a program. And here's where I'll now ask you to move into your groups. We've had a couple join us since then, and so let's see. Who wasn't here when I assigned ones and twos? Okay, just two? Is that right? Okay, wonderful. So let's have a 1 and a 2. Okay. And so for the ones, once again, we'll see that the government is going to try to help with this question of self-determination, which, once again, if we step back, sounds like a positive thing. People choosing for themselves. Sounds like a positive thing. What we'll see is this will become quite a complex issue, at least for some. Would you go ahead and, if you are a 1, would you come and move to this side of the room, these 2 rows here? If you are a 2, would you come and move to these 2 rows here? So 1's over here on Brenna's side, designated as your side, and then the 2's over here on Isaac's side. Go ahead and move. 2's here, 1's here. And we'll go through these slides, and I'll ask you to do something very specific in your reasoning this time, because you'll see that you'll do it individually, and then I'll give you some time to come together and brainstorm and really talk through things that you thought were either positive if you're on the positive side or negative if you're on the negative side. Right? The ones are looking for how the IRA was positive. The reasoning, do you see anything as positive? The 2's, what would you reason would be negative about this government program in either the way it was done, or its objectives, or its consequences, etc. As we go through these slides, I'll give you an opportunity to just take some notes. You may want to come up with a plan first, and I'll give you 1 minute to do that after I give some instruction. Because as we go through these slides, you'll see that there are things like the government is providing Indians with jobs, relief, bilingual and bicultural schools, hospitals, etc. And depending on what you think about this and your own reasoning, you may say, I want to write that down from my side, either as positive or as negative. After you write down whatever you feel should be written down for your side only, so don't write for both sides, just for your side, based on what you would reason, I'm going to then have you sort of circle the wagons and talk about your reasoning and say, why did you feel that this was positive? And you may see some people have differing opinions. That's great. That's where we can reason together. And that is a godly thing to do. With that said, I'll go through these slides, and I'll give you a minute though before we do to decide, do we want sort of a scribe to, make some kind of notes that would be helpful, or would you like every person to sort of do his or her own thing when it comes to taking notes? I think certainly if you have a scribe do it, it might be harder for you to remember what to talk about. If you each do it though, you'll have an opportunity to then bring your own voice to the table when you talk with your own group in a moment. After we talk in our own groups, you'll see that's when we'll have a discussion together and say, we thought these things were positive, and you'll have a chance to say, well, we thought these things were negative. And overall, I would love to try to come to some kind of a consensus about the IRA. Okay? So there's the activity. I'll let you talk for a moment about how you want to do the note-taking.
Yeah. And then are we gonna come
Wonderful.
together and then see if people have the same thing?
Have a plan? A plan? Wonderful. Okay, here we go. So 10 years after the Indian Citizenship Act, by the way, and I'll give you time to write some things down too. I'm not just going to read it and then flip. So you can certainly listen along, but also think about what you want to take notes on, or at least mark in the book, if it's your own book, it's your own copy. 10 years after that Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, the Indian Reorganization Act, or IRA, fundamentally altered the U.S. government's dealings with Native peoples. The IRA was only one part of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's Depression-era Indian New Deal, which also provided Indians with jobs, relief, bilingual and bicultural schools, hospitals, agricultural and industrial assistance, other welfare entitlements, and an Indian Arts and Crafts Board to promote and preserve Native artistic achievement. John Collier, and you read his document, so you know a little bit about him. You can kind of feel his spirit from that document a little bit. FDR's newly appointed Commissioner of Indian Affairs spearheaded the efforts of the Indian New Deal, especially the IRA, which ended 50 years of forced assimilation and the taking of tribal lands, and encouraged tribes to establish their own self-governing bodies and preserve native traditions. Go ahead and take notes. If you're the positive side, take notes on only what you feel is positive. If you're on the negative side, take notes on only what you feel is negative.
Leland Anderson to the front office, please.
And keep in mind both the what and the how in your reasoning. How much more time would you like? 1 minute? Okay, you've got it, my friend.
Was this spearheaded? Does that mean ended or
He led out in those efforts. 20 seconds. All right, you ready? Here we go. So once again, here's FDR. This is another one. We had of course that class where we looked at the New Deal as a whole, and you're doing a million things, at once. And that's where I made that invitation. This is such a meaty topic. You cannot hope to digest it all at once. This idea of the New Deal and just how it fundamentally altered the United States government in so many ways that we see today. We can trace back to FDR and the New Deal. Anyway, so here's the picture. Just keep that in mind, and we'll keep going. Well, in a termination of the 1887 Dawes Severalty Act and a public acknowledgement of its wrongs, which had resulted in the loss of over 90 million acres of pledged tribal reservation lands, the IRA again granted tribes the right to own land collectively, which increased their holdings by 4 million acres and their agricultural income by 47 million within 13 years, and deemed that any quote-unquote surplus land needed to be returned to the reservation. So let me give you an example of what this act had done. Essentially, if you had this much land that had been tribal land in a treaty, it had been deeded to the tribe, said from the government, we acknowledge this is your land, this is land for, tribe X. Well, what they did is, in this Dawes Severalty Act, or the Dawes Allotment Act, let's say that there were only 5 individuals on that land. This is a simplified example. But if there are 5 individuals on that land, they'll say, well, each individual gets this amount of acreage in order to be a productive farmer, because we're trying to assimilate in 1887. Right? That means that the Dawes Act said, well, this is really all they need to be a productive citizen. Therefore, all of this, we're going to open up to white settlement, even though it was originally land that had been given to them in a treaty. So that was the Dawes Act of 1887, right? Because the goal was assimilation and saying, this is all you need to be a farmer. You can farm on this much land and have plenty of food. Therefore, we're going to go back on what we originally gave you and say, well, you don't need that. This is deemed as, quote unquote, right, surplus land. R. It was like a line. There we go. There we go. Anyway, essentially, what we'll see is that this act gives this back as much as possible. Said, we'll let you own it collectively. If this is what you said you had before, if we can give it back to you in some way, we will. And therefore, the expectation of assimilation and you have to farm on plots like this is no longer what the government is aiming to engineer in the lives of Indians. Now, if you want to roam free and chase whatever game you can, welcome, JT, then you can have this land back and do that, even though we don't see that as being as efficient as the way we do things in an agricultural European type society. That was done away with. So just, that's the first part of this here. The IRA also allowed Indians to establish local self-government and tribal corporations to develop reservation resources, which provided Native peoples with greater responsibility over their own affairs. It provided federal aid to train Indians in the best practices of land management, public health, and law enforcement, and promised job preparation for careers in the Bureau of Indian Affairs and scholarship money for Native students. Once again, all being done with taxpayer dollars, all of this.
Were Native Americans paying taxes?
As citizens, what we'll see is any income beyond would be taxable. If they're just getting gifts from the government, they're not taxed on that. But if, let's say, they go out and they get some other job, better job, more than the allotment, then they're able to be taxed. So go ahead, if you see positives, write down the positives. If you see negatives, write down the negatives, but not both, just one on your side. And so JT, would you jump on here? This is the group that's looking for negatives of the Indian Reorganization Act and the Indian New Deal. So essentially, if you see anything up here that you think is negative, you'd want to mark that, and then you'll have a discussion with your group about the negatives. This group is going to have a discussion about what they see as the positives, and then we're going to put our heads together and come back together and share our reasoning and do some relating.
Is this the syllabus?
We're actually in topic 7 this time. Yeah. This will be the IRA this time. So, and you'll see we are now just here. Just finished that sentence right there on that slide here. Great. Got some great lists going. Excellent reasoning, friends. Keep up the great work. How much more time do you need for this slide in your reasoning and recording of that reasoning? We good? Ready to keep going? Wonderful. Okay. Next slide then. Tribes were required to accept the IRA's provisions, including its encouragement of the establishment of tribal self-government by referendum. Upon receiving a majority vote by adult tribal members, a tribe would be allowed to write its own constitution, which would then require approval by another majority vote, and finally by the U.S. Secretary of the Interior before the federal government would recognize it as a valid charter. So notice this is where you'll really want to be discerning in your reasoning. Because notice what the goal is. They're saying, we want to establish tribal self-government, but we want to do it in this way so that we can then approve it for you. You have to have this kind of a government, but we'll let you choose. So just think about that. Anyway, what we'll see is that it's interesting because tribes who accepted the IRA would also be eligible to elect a tribal council, and the IRA's provisions would apply only to those tribes that accepted it by vote. And remember, every piece of this legislation would mean that there was another organization created, another group of people paid, all of it coming out of tax dollars. And so this is really important. Anytime you come up with these new programs, there are ways that the government is supporting them, and we need to consider those too, in terms of the what as well as the how. We ready to move on? This one doesn't have a lot to it, just explains a few things. We ready? Okay, here we go. This is Harold Ikes. He was the Secretary of the Interior who would approve these tribal constitutions. We just talked about those. Anyway, so here we go. The vote to accept or reject the IRA, now that we've talked about it, take a look at how Indians viewed the vote, or viewed the IRA. Left Native America deeply divided. Eventually, 174 tribes accepted the IRA, and 135 of those created tribal constitutions, but 78 tribes rejected it. Native peoples who favored the IRA, and this is where, let's say that you're positive, you may want to look at their reasoning and see if you agree with them. And you'll see those who oppose it, you'll want to see if you agree with their reasoning. You may or may not. Native peoples who favored the IRA reasoned that, though imperfect, it was the best available way to effect positive political and economic change. As historian Paul C. Rosier has commented, tribes that accepted the IRA saw it as an attempt to reorganize relations with the federal government on their own terms and to construct an American community of their own design. To support their position, they pointed to the IRA's potential to restore millions of acres, notice, getting the quote-unquote surplus back, to restore millions of acres. Where do we go here?
Third line from the book.
Third line, oh, thank you so much. Of tribal territories, improve education and cultural preservation in Native America, and provide measures for self-government. That's those who favored it. So I'll give you a moment, and I'll have you can be with, who is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You could choose either side. I didn't let them choose those. I don't know if that's terribly fair.
So,
But
it's just fine.
essentially, this group here, they are reasoning negatives about the Indian New Deal and the Indian Reorganization Act. This group here, they're reasoning positives about the same two things. So I'll let you jump on with each group. They're doing individual reasoning right now from each of the slides, and then they're going to come together and share, talk about any differences they might have, any similarities, and then we'll come together and really try to reason together. Any more time for this one? We ready to move on, or is there anybody who needs a little bit more? Feeling all right, Logan? You all right? Okay. Brenna? Great. Okay. All right, here we go. Well, on the other hand, and this is where this side you may want to see if you agree. On the other hand, tribes that opposed the IRA complained that it attempted to impose on them alien political and economic systems, that its majority rule requirements violated traditional tribal consensus politics. Does that make sense? They're saying this has to be done by majority vote. And they're saying, well, as tribes, if we voted as tribes, we tried to work for consensus. This isn't our way of deciding things, but yet you're saying you want to give us self-government, by majority rule. And so what we'll see is that it violated those consensus politics, that it swept minority Indian opinions under the rug, and that it assumed that, and this is one of the big assumptions that many tribes and those who speak for tribes have said, not all of us want to be in tribes, that it assumed that Native peoples functioned as a unified tribe, right? Which was not always true to traditional methods of Native governance. You had many who would operate more as bands, as families, as smaller groups, and loosely they would confederate as what we call a tribe. And we think of it as a tribe, as a country. They're unified. They all believe the same thing. They're happy to be governed together. Not necessarily, but yet that is the assumption that this act had. In short, as historian Alvin M. Josephy Jr. has observed, Indians resented Collier's IRA because it came from a man who believed that he, quote, knew better than the Indians what was good for them, close quote. Others protested the IRA because of its back to the blanket effects, which promoted segregation and crippled Indians' chances to succeed in a white world. So remember before, for many years, go back to, Washington, Jefferson, etc., all the way, assimilation was the goal. Let's try to help them so they can get along in what will be the dominant culture. Now it's, no. You go back to your ways there on that land, and we're going to modernize without you. Did that help? Did that hurt? That's a question we'll discuss. They promoted segregation and then crippled their chance to succeed in a white world. Still others, such as the Seneca of New York and the powerful Navajo of the Southwest, saw the IRA as a threat to their treaty rights and existing modes of self-government, and they already had them. They're saying here you're saying we have to change our government in the name of self-government. What kind of self-government is that? But some said, well, maybe this is the best chance we have at making it in the world. Just say, I am doing a great work so that I cannot come down.
There you go.
Nehemiah 6:3.
That's right.
All right. Any more time for this one? All right. Well, here's the very end of it. Whether Indians accepted or rejected Collier's attempts to help Native America, however, they began to develop an increased awareness of the dimensions of self-determination, the goal that would frame Native people's demand into the 21st century. And so my question is, how, number one, you can talk about this in your groups, how do you feel about the idea of self-determination, that they decide, right, what course they'll take? And then number two, do you feel that the IRA helped with that goal? Did the Indian New Deal as a whole help or hurt self-determination? You've taken some notes, you've reasoned some things. Would you go ahead now and would you circle the wagons, the positives together, the negatives together? Which side did you decide to join? Okay. And right, the positives together. Sorry. I apologize. Forgive me. So positives together, negatives together, and go ahead, circle the wagons, and would you share your observations, your reasoning, and see if you can kind of come to a consensus, first of all, in your group, and then in your group, and then we'll talk together about what we may see as positive or what we may see as negative, and really try to decide, was this the best course for Native America? Go.
I wrote down some notes for negatives, but I'll just switch. Okay.
I think it's just like a way of saying we're in charge of you. So we're indirectly in charge of you. Because we're forcing the ruler and forcing us. But
I think that what the government was trying to do wasn't necessarily that, but the fact that it was taking the agency of Indians and it was entirely like it was kind of forced upon them and it was given to them, and so they didn't really have to work for anything, and just the whole welfare fact of it, and it's just kind of the principle like give a man a fish and you'll feed him for a day, and teach a man a fish, teach a man to fish.
With 170 tribes choosing the IRA, that left the rest of them kind of through the bus because they kind of just wasn't an option. Either they choose IRA or they just get dumped out the middle or kept trying to support them. So
You either choose this or else it's going to be real bad for you.
Right.
What kind of breed is that?
You were forced.
yeah. And they ended 50 years of forced assimilation.
On the second page, it's transfer required.
They're saying one thing.
Is
We're not finding really positive.
This is why I was curious, because the essays were, I mean, for everyone that was positive, there was one that was negative. For everyone that was negative, there was one that was positive.
And the one that was positive, really pragmatic, did not good. They all look around the doll, still are, they're on the side.
And this will lead us to our next topic in our next hour. So, yeah.
This 30 years down the road, it's
Now, of course, we do have the benefit of hindsight, but still, just on principles, we can make some good judgment calls.
So, I would say it's going to just recognize and publicly state.
Yeah, technology, that was really good.
Much needed.
What about overturning the Dawes Act?
Yeah, that.
Well, that's
people's culture.
Giving back the land.
Because that is a lot of land and a lot of money. That was significant.
Systems of government, basically.
It caused stability instead of creating chaos.
And even if it did make them a government, the US still had
Right, right.
Kind of we'll veto your constitution if we don't like it.
They let the process to get their own constitution.
I think this is a fascinating topic, though, because I think it has so many great implications for what is good government and what isn't, and how has the government tried to solve problems over the past, 60, 70 years.
Yeah.
Even more now. It's been a long time, 100 years. You know what I mean? And really, how how is that affecting us today? Because we see these legacies today. I mean, these programs didn't just make a splash in their time. We're still paying for them today.
Welfare because
We don't study history.
like they offer them
We study everything.
all of the conveniences of the new world and
Right.
used to living off of the
Sure.
land.
But
And
we don't
so
get
for
the
us,
picture until it's almost too
so
late.
there's-
to change it.
Yes.
welfare for us, where
Well, and it is interesting too because
For everyone else to get it.
Yeah,
we
right.
take away our work.
it's interesting because you just see the growing of government, and as government grows, it is so hard, almost impossible for government ever to shrink.
Like they're used
Only
to
gets bigger.
totally
You know,
surviving.
and honestly, some of the government gets bigger to take care of some of the problems of government getting bigger in the past. And it just,
Takes away the
So-
desire to progress.
Yeah, it's just
so
like-
it is really interesting, it's just fascinating to talk through.
No reward for good work.
So we started-
You're feeling pretty unified in your position, the different points that you've made?
Members.
Great,
But
great.
again, it's not really the one to do it.
Another one.
I would say at least they had to accept it, but it wasn't. But again, that was a majority, so it wasn't.
What their norm was to have.
Switching from
Develop an increased awareness of
First
the
we're
layers
gonna
of self-determination.
Right.
Maybe that was one positive.
assimilation, and then we're gonna go for segregation, almost went back and
Yeah, it's,
several
have all
times.
this land on a reservation. No, actually, we're gonna take half of it away. No, actually, we're gonna give it back,
Develop an increased awareness of the layers of self-determination.
right?
But at the same time, they were given,
But you can even,
choose this, choose this.
Right, but even if they,
yeah, I mean, I don't know if it-
they at least begin to see the
there
problems
wasn't
and they
any
were more determined. They didn't always
the government of the United States said, all right, let's segregate. I mean, it's simply the rise of our culture for it had to be, 150-year process until they finally did some laws, and even after they made the laws, they're still, they won't follow through. People still have their deep-rooted freedom. There's still prejudice too. Yeah. And kind of some similar ones towards any minority, but specifically blacks.
American
And they also made it to, it was not like what they wanted or needed.
Right, and I think that,
Because that was in their mind.
So to keep us
right,
entertained.
I think they put that last.
Yeah, so another thing I like,
Increased awareness.
Yeah,
of
which
the
is
layers
nice
of
is
self-determination. So
here it
even
says,
though it was a bad
how
thing,
that
they started to
he
be
came from
aware
was
of
to believe that he
I don't know
knew
what
better than Indians what was good for them.
Seems like they
Yeah,
can
Collier.
For a country of
Almost.
everyone's equal, but we're not treating them as equal, we're not treating them equal. We're giving them an opportunity, but not one that they can match. So we have to take it for free.
We're different. Like we're still all people, we're all humans, but they're very different. Like the way they do things, the way they connect.
Yeah, but that's true.
All right, friends, are you ready? I think we've had some good conversation. And this time, this is what's a little bit different about this activity. You'll see, I haven't framed it as a debate or as a court case because I don't want to do that. I simply wanted you to focus on looking for certain things, you to focus on looking for others, just so we could try to give both sides at least a fair evaluation before we then have a talk together. So this is what I want to say. Now I'd like to come together and really just share what could people point to as positives, what really, we want to keep this in mind because once again, even when we feel very strongly about one position, we can also acknowledge, I can see where you're coming from here, but I still feel this way. Does that make sense? And that's an important skill to have. So with that said, I'd love to have the positives go first and just say, what were some of the things that could have been positive? People may have seen them as positive. Maybe you see them as positive. And then same thing with the negative side. And then talk together and really reason, if you were to vote, is this something that helped Native peoples? Yes or no, and why? Okay, so let's have that conversation based on your reasoning. And now we'll start some relating here as well. So positives, who would like to speak for the positives? And you can each share something, however you'd like to do it. Something from either that you wrote down personally or that you gleaned from the conversation that you had together.
Okay, so we talked about how it did provide some means for Indians to become better, like education, It gave them education so they could cook better. It gave them like hospitals so they had better care. So they'll just get, just get stronger, healthier, like as a nation, I guess. Or not as a nation, but as a people.
Sure. Thank you.
Let's see, what's my share? This is kind of hard to. We looked at the end and well, I'm not sure what to say. We looked at the end a little bit, and it talked about the self-determination, and we kind of talked about how it did spark self-determination in them, even though it wasn't given to them by this new act, but it was able to give determination to them.
Thank you for that.
So kind of what Brenna said, it gave them new things that they didn't have, and taught them more things and like how to be self-governed and yeah.
Thank you. Would anybody like to speak about overturning the Dawes Act?
Yeah.
Please, Caleb.
So one of the things that was probably, like for sure you could not argue as a negative, was that they were given their land back that was agreed to be there for them. And the Dawes Act was overturned, which was continuing to take that land. So they were able to have that as a collective, as a tribe rather than individual, and it increased their land holdings by a lot and increased their economic prospects by a whole lot over the next little while. So.
Great. Thank you for that. Do you remember how many acres again? I think sometimes it is important just to try to.
4 million, I think, right?
4 million acres.
4 million acres. That's a lot.
And there was a public acknowledgement of its wrongs. That was kind of nice. They
Okay.
apologized finally.
Okay, great. We've got a public apology, the acknowledgement of wrongs. Great. Anything else? Anything else here?
One thing.
Please, Caleb.
So one of the things that the Indians themselves appreciated from it, the ones who chose, was
Yes.
that it was able to better preserve their culture because they were able to be as a tribe, or at least closer to being as a tribe.
Right.
And they were able to, that was a way that they felt that those changes could be made, was to accept it. So.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, on the negative side, please, we'll go around and you can each share something.
Okay, so when you guys talked about like the schools and the hospitals, and like when it talked about the jobs and stuff like that for the Indians, this is coming out of the people's tax dollars, and this was during the Great Depression, and most of the citizens didn't even have jobs or a good education, and then
Thank you, Gordon.
So, overruling the Dawes Act with the new IRA Act, that was a good move. It was right to give them a lot of their land back. Problem was is that they gave back a lot of land, but it wasn't nearly as much as they had taken away. If I remember right, they took away 90 million acres and only restored 4 million. And so if you compare that, I think that we should have given a lot more back. And like with the federal aid and stuff, we see that, well, it's kind of like, I kind of think of it as a form of welfare, because you have the Native Americans who live off the land, their clothes are from the buffalo and from the deer, they use all their resources, and then moving to this new form of living where things are just given to them. They don't have to really work for what they what they do, and it took a lot of their skills and their livelihood away from them.
Thank you very much. JT, any other comments to add based on your reasoning?
Well, just for me, it seems kind of like a subtle way of saying that we're in charge of you no matter what, because they're like giving them a good situation and a terrible situation to have to choose, and like if you're in that predicament, you're probably going to choose the better one.
Right.
Then they give you the opportunity to form your own government, but in the end, the U.S. still have the deciding factor on how your constitution will be made. How your self-government is.
Right. Which really is the question. Is this self-government? Is this self-determination?
I think it's the U.S. determining what their determination will be.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Please.
We also discussed a little over 170 tribes adopted the IRA Act. And so what about the rest of the tribes that didn't? They were either forced to choose that or just kind of be thrown off to the side and left for dead, you know? So that's another problem that we had with it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Camilla, anything that hasn't been shared yet that you reason?
Just the whole welfare situation, it just puts them in debt of the government, and it makes them like a lesser force in the government, I guess. It just makes them lower, and yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Thank you. Well said. Thank you very much. Please. Anything that you'd add, Mr. Anderson?
I'm fascinated by this concept of majority rules or full consensus.
Sure.
Maybe in the church we can understand that as a little better because we see common consent.
Sure.
Once a decision, and that's part of the genius of the church, once a decision is made, everyone gets behind it and supports it, whether they agreed with it in the beginning or not, at least in the council system of the church, that's the way it should work, and probably in family councils as well. But I guess the federal government didn't often really perceive the good things that the Indian tribes may have, which in this one, you know, full consent of everyone, unity, in a lot of ways may have better results than the constant infighting we see between the Democrats and the Republicans. And even once, you know, something passes, they still have resentment and still kind of try and undermine it. But we can also look at the experiments of democracy with the United States being kind of the world's policeman. You know, when we've tried to impose democracy, supposed democracy on other
we're going to force freedom on you.
Right. And how much success has it had? Differing success in different situations, because maybe we don't take into account the full gamut of their cultural background. We just want to force our system onto someone else. It often ends up causing lots of problems.
Sure. Thanks for that. Thank you. JT?
Just kind of building off of that. I don't know how, I was thinking about this, but like what John teaches about society and government is you join a government to protect yourself and your property, and you're giving up part of your rights to do that. The native people use those rights to grow and develop by themselves, and that's what they've done for generations. And so we're kind of taking away those natural rights to protect their property, even though we've been taking away their property. And it just kind of seems like it would confuse them because they're like, wait, I don't understand what's going on anymore.
Right.
They don't really, I don't feel like they could trust the government because of this.
So. Thank you. Thank you, JT. Please, Isaac, and then Mr. Anderson.
Sorry, I've shared kind of a lot, but I just had a thought pop into my head. We talked about at the beginning of the year about the forming of the Constitution, and the Constitution's brilliant. Like for a new country, like we've thrived on it for centuries now. And we see, like, everybody, with our Constitution, everybody gets to participate in the race, and everybody gets to run. But the problem is, we invited the Native Americans into the race, but we kind of broke their legs. And so they weren't able to really run the race. They're like, here, you have full, here's the race, here's your ticket, you got your number pinned on your back, you can run it.
Yeah.
Good luck, but we're taking away all of your resources to be able to run with the rest of the people,
right.
Or everybody else gets a head start, or
we sort of chained them to the government pace car, and now we're dragging them behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a really interesting thing to think of. Thank you for bringing it back to that analogy. It's a great one. Please.
This is more of a question than it is
Sure.
negative, but I look at that Indian.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
I look at that Indian school up in Brigham City.
Yes.
Was it built as a result of this 1934 New Deal Indian policy? I'm going to suppose that it was. It looks like it's about from that time period. And when you send all the Indians off to be together in one school, I don't know if that's really profitable because of the segregation amalgamation idea.
Right.
You know,
And I guess, this question of who should decide where Indians go to school? Is it the U.S. government? That's a really interesting question, right? Some people get very angry thinking that the U.S. government should tell Indian children where to go to school. Yeah.
And, along with that, were the teachers at that school all Indians as well? And is it kind of like, was it George Washington Carver that had his university for all blacks, and to what degree in this great country that claims to have equality for everyone do we set some races or almost cause subcultures and cliquiness and we claim that we have no racism, but yet we set aside and draw stereotypes.
Yeah, I love it because those who opposed the IRA said this encourages segregation. It's a back to the blanket. Indians don't modernize, go live in the teepees, sit on a rug for the rest of eternity, essentially. We'll tell you need to come here and go to school. But yet this idea of why, in the name of self-determination, are we determining things for others? This is really interesting. Yeah.
One other quick thought, when you strip a person of their dignity, as I think was done, because they took away they have to turn somewhere else to fill that void.
Sure.
And we've seen where that went.
Yeah, and that's where we'll start our next hour. We'll see with those consequences. We will see and I've got some, you probably read, some of these are just chilling statistics about where this experiment went. I want to end with this. Oh, by the way, we need to take our little vote here. Just personally, this is, like I said, not as a debate, but personally, are you for or against the Indian New Deal with its attendant IRA? I'd love to just sort of call a roll.
I think I'm more against it.
More against? Okay, by the way, you can always pass to it if you want. Should have said that first. But thank you, though. More against?
Yeah,
more against? Against? Against?
Aside from the Dawes Act, against.
Aside from the Dawes, overturning the Dawes Act. Against. Thank you for that.
Against.
Against? Pass? Yeah. Against? 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 Thank you all so much. Thank you all. I want to end with this one here. We know that we had our agency before this world was, and that Lucifer attempted to take it from us. He had no confidence in the principle of agency or in us, and argued for imposed salvation. He insisted that with his plan, none would be lost. But he seemed not to recognize, or perhaps not to care, that in addition, none would be any wiser, any stronger, any more compassionate, or any more grateful if his plan were followed. I love thinking about this great quote from a prophet of God, President Monson, November 2010, ensign from the October 2010 conference. We'll continue this discussion, you'll see in our next class. So I'll have us sort of save any comments for then, because there's some things that I really want to talk through. You see, this sort of it's just the next step here. It's where did this all lead to? What were the consequences, and how do we feel about those? And what do you do? What do you do today? What do you do? Anyway, friends, I testify that certainly what we should never do is follow Satan's plan. And certainly what we should always do is follow our Heavenly Father's plan. Now, obviously, there are a lot of specifics that we can hash out in terms of the Native Americans and how to do that. But I testify with President Benson at the beginning that we are here to help invite others to come unto Christ and be perfected in Him. And then they'll go and change their environments. But certainly, this plan of force, even imposed salvation, can never work. And that's my testimony. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen?
Amen.
All right, friends, we'll take a break. We'll come back. I'm very excited to continue the story because really this is a to be continued. It's like ending the book in the middle. We've got to come back for the next chapter. So thank you so much. We'll take a break and then we'll come back. Thanks, Leah. Thank you, Brenna.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson, for all of your help.